Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice from experts across the state. We talk about vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Thank you for listening. I hope this show is something that you'll look forward to checking in with every week. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, Gardening Utah aims to inspire you and keep you in the know of what tasks you should be accomplishing in your yard and meet amazing, informative experts along the way. This show airs on the radio on the weekends here in Utah at 10 a.m. on 860 AM KKAT, and episodes drop every weekend on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, so hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. On today's show, we have Shaun Moser, who is the manager of the Conservation Garden Park out at the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District, and we have a really fascinating conversation about lawns. Now, we talk about the benefits of lawn, but we also talk about some alternatives, and I learned so much about the history of lawn, and I can't wait for you to hear this because he talks all about when we started actually installing lawns on our properties in the first place, and the answer will fascinate you as it sure did me. So it really gets you thinking about why. Why do we have lawns and what are we using them for, and are they needed? He also talks about a lot of alternatives and things that you can add if you already have a lawn that to your existing lawn that can help you save water and really just conserve and just make your lawn and property more efficient and make it work for you. So that is the theme of today's show. It really is interesting, and we're going to get into that right after this. But first, the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is save those Epsom salts for the bath, but don't put them in the garden. Now listen, here is a very big myth. You'll see this a lot online and in different Facebook groups and things where people will suggest that you use Epsom salt when you plant your tomatoes or adding it as a fertilizer to your flowers and plants. Well, guess what? That is completely unnecessary, especially in the state of Utah. Epsom salt is essentially magnesium and sulfate, and those are nutrients that soil in Utah is just not lacking. As a matter of fact, Utah had the largest industrial magnesium producer located right on the western bank of the Great Salt Lake. So as you can tell, it is just not something our soil needs. You don't need to add it to the soil when you plant your tomatoes. It does not prevent blossom end rot, and you can just save it for the bath. And as always, the best soil amendment to add to your soil is always going to be compost. And if you wonder about your soil composition, I always suggest getting your soil tested from USU. It is definitely a worthy investment. And then just add to your soil what it is actually missing.
And that's your Gardening Utah tip of the week. Brought to you by The Advocates. If you're in an accident, you deserve an advocate. Call 801-355-5550 or visit utahadvocates.com. Never miss a tip for your garden and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Okay, well, we are here with the Conservation Garden Park Manager, Shaun Moser. Shaun, thanks for joining us today on Gardening Utah.
Thanks for having me.
So when we had the UNLA meeting about a month or so back, I kept hearing from so many exhibitors, did you hear Shaun Moser's talk? And so I'm so happy to have you on the show to give our listeners the inside of everything that you were talking about there. And we're going to talk a little bit about rethinking our relationship to lawns. So Shaun, have at it. Tell us all about it.
Yeah. So my background and my job is in water conservation and lawn, and considering what it means to have a lawn in this day is part of what I do for my job. Right. And I like lawn. Most people like lawn. Right. But I think like with a lot of things, it's maybe too much of a good thing. We've installed maybe too much of it. Yeah. And I think be rethinking what it means to have a lawn now, and especially when it comes to water conservation. And so maybe I'll start a little bit with just like the history of lawn in general in this country, and that will kind of lead us to talking more about alternatives and going forward into the future. Perfect. So lawn actually started in the early 1800s in the United States. So it's been around for a while. And it was imported overseas when the colonists came over. And it was actually originally installed as like a display of wealth. So you saw it at like Thomas Jefferson's home, George Washington's home. And basically what the wealthy people like them were trying to say was, I have so much land and so much money, I can take some of my land and just have this green carpet where I don't have to grow food and I don't have to make money off this land because I have so much money. I can just display this green carpet just to show how wealthy I am. So other wealthy people saw that and started to copy it. So that just started to snowball, right? So famous landscape architects from the past started to incorporate the idea of a lawn into parks, into neighborhoods, different things like that. Then in the 50s or the 60s, as the suburban population really started to increase, and as sod production became a thing, that's when lawns really started to take off. And then it just has been a thing ever since. And I think there's still some degree of people wanting to show a nice looking lawn in their front yard, right? Say, look at my green lawn. I still think there's some of that going on, but maybe not quite as much anymore. I think a lot of times lawn is installed, especially like with a new house, because maybe people spent all their money on their house and they don't have any money for their landscape anymore. Or it's the easy thing to do. You don't have to think about it. It can just be installed, right? So I don't think it's a display of wealth or social status anymore. Right. I think it's just a remnant from that age. But I think there's different alternatives that we can use that's not just standard Kentucky bluegrass anymore. So
that is so interesting. I had no idea, first of all, that the history of lawn. I mean, it's like I'm 69 episodes in, haven't ever heard that before. So that is so fascinating to me, and it makes so much sense.
Yeah, and lawn has changed over the years. When lawn was first introduced, it was not a monoculture, meaning it wasn't just straight bluegrass or straight fescue. Okay. There was typically clover mixed into it. In fact, up until the introduction of 2,4-D, broadleaf weed killer, clover was almost an essential part of a grass seed mix. During my time making the presentation for the Green Conference, I found a quote, and maybe I'll read it right now because I think it really gives some good insights to what people were thinking about in lawns in the past and the kind of mix of lawn and clover that people used to have. So if it's all right, I'll read that right now.
I'd love to hear it.
So this is from A New Way to Kill Your Weeds in Your Lawn, from Milton Carleton, 1957. And it says, the thought of white Dutch clover as a lawn weed will come as a distinct shock to old-time gardeners. I can remember the day when lawn mixtures were judged by the quality and percentage of clover seed that they contained. The higher this figure, the better the mixture. I can remember the loving care which old-time gardeners gave their clover lawns, the smug look on their face of the proud homeowner whose stand was the best in the neighborhood was really something to behold.
Wow.
So you can see the cultural shift that has occurred. People thinking that clover used to be an essential part of the lawn. Now it's a weed and you have to eradicate it because it has to be a monoculture. So things have changed a lot, even in 50, 60 years.
Yeah. So. Well, I remember when I grew up, my grandparents over in Murray had I would say their lawn was half clover. What I loved about it is laying down on the grass and looking for the 4-leaf clovers,
Yeah. Yeah. I remember doing that as a kid too. And you try to find the 4-leaf clover. And one thing that I think we're missing with the monoculture Kentucky bluegrass that we have now is it's essentially a desert for pollinators. Whereas if you had some clover or some yarrow or another perennial like that would bloom, then it wouldn't be so much of a desert for pollinators anymore. And clover as a legume, so it's a nitrogen fixer. So it's pulling nitrogen out of the air. It's pulling it into the root system. And then when the clover dies, it actually releases nitrogen into the plants and the soil around it. So you actually use less fertilizer or can use less fertilizer in your lawn if you have clover mixed into it. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that I bought clover seeds last week because now everybody's going to go buy clover. I bought some mini clover and then some Dutch white clover. So
nice.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Like big bags of it.
That's great. Yeah. In fact, I bought a mixture of tall fescue and clover and seeded it into my back lawn probably a couple years ago. So the mix that I bought was specifically recommended to handle dogs and their foot traffic and their the salt in their urine. So the tall fescue can handle that a little bit better, and the clover holds up in that situation a little bit better too. So and from a water conservation perspective, if you have a lawn that is more resilient and has ways of pulling in nitrogen itself, and maybe you allow the lawn to grow a little bit taller and then maybe give it a little bit less water, and it still can remain green. The grass will brown out a little bit in the summer, but the clover stays green. Maybe we can use a little less water overall on our lawns too.
Very cool. So do you suggest, let's say you're a homeowner that has a lawn established already. Mm-hmm. What are some steps to integrate clover into your grass if you choose to do so?
Yeah, so most of the websites or retailers that sell mixes like this, what I've seen that they recommend that you do is that you do this either in the spring or the fall, and you cut your existing lawn really short. Okay. Like set your mower to like one of the lowest settings, and then you just overseed with the mix that you've bought. It might have grass seed in it. It may be straight clover. And then you'll have to establish that new seed, get it to germinate. So you'll have to add maybe a little bit more water in that scenario until it germinates and starts growing. And then overall, that lawn that grows in that has clover in it should take less water and fertilizer and be better for the environment overall and be something for the pollinators too.
Absolutely. So what do you suggest to do with, how do you change up the care with regard to, let's say, weed killer and that kind of a thing? I mean, then you're going to need to change up your game, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I talk about these lawn alternatives, I typically suggest it to someone that isn't like OCD about having this perfectly green lawn, right? Yeah. Perfectly mowed and maintained lawn. So I would, with the mowing height, I would recommend that people mow at the highest height for their lawnmower deck, which is what we recommend doing anyway for water conservation. And then as far as weed killer goes, you can still use 2,4-D broadleaf weed killer, but I wouldn't do it as a broadcast application where you're just spraying it all over your whole lawn or applying it with a fertilizer like Weed B Gone. I would do spot sprays. So let's say there's morning glory, field bindweed, or something that you want to control. I would do spot applications rather than spreading it out over the whole lawn in one shot, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And really quick, as a little bit of a sidebar, you have to be really careful with 2,4-D, right? I mean, I know that it can get airborne and really even quite a bit away, do some pretty decent damage to other plant materials, right?
Yeah, so it can volatilize, especially when the temperature is high enough, and it will drift into grapes and other things like that and do some damage. So you want to do it when the temperatures are cool. And honestly, where I've come down on my own lawn in my backyard is I just don't use weed killer at all in my back lawn.
I don't either. Yeah.
Yeah. I just let the lawn grow. I let the clover grow. There might be a dandelion that pops up. I might pull it out. I might not. I don't really care.
Yeah.
So, and it's actually a freeing mindset to have, to not be so concerned about every little weed that pops up in your lawn.
Isn't that the truth? It can be really stressful. And now that, I mean, you've totally reframed my thinking. It's like, okay, so why am I doing this again? Because it used to be a symbol of wealth in the past, and now it's just, you're doing it because that's what you do.
That's just what you do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's just what you do. Yeah. And I think as we change what a lawn is and where we have lawn, I think things will get a lot better overall as far as water conservation and sustainability. So.
Yeah, and I really have personally noticed a big shift in mindset. I mean, a ton of that has to do with local scapes and things like that. But I have noticed that so many more people are creating sort of, shaded seating areas outside first, and creating a fun entertainment area instead of just a whole bunch of grass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I have 4 suggestions as far as steps that people can take to start to rethink their relationship with lawn, right? Okay. So first, we have a lot of lawn, a lot of Kentucky bluegrass out there already. And as great as Localscapes is, and as great as the Flip Your Strip program is and all of that, we're still going to have a bunch of lawn out there, right? It's going to take many years to get rid of that lawn. We're doing our best. We're running those programs, but the fact remains we still have some lawn. So I recommend that we reduce the inputs for the lawn that we already have, right? That's the cheapest, easiest thing to do. So you reduce the amount of water, you reduce the amount of fertilizer, you reduce the amount of chemicals that you put on the lawn, just in general. I think that's a first step. It's an easy step for people to take. And then step 2 is reduce the amount of lawn that we have and take it out of the areas where it doesn't make sense. So side yards where it's usually too narrow to do anything with it tends to struggle anyway. The park strip, which people are starting to become more and more aware of, that it just doesn't make sense to have lawn. Or even like in a city park situation, do we really need to have wall-to-wall lawn? Or can lawn just be where the soccer field is or where the baseball field is? And then 3 is we want to make sure that we're designing the shape of lawn. So lawn needs to be a designed element. It can't be a default ground cover anymore. We need to design it with how sprinkler systems spray. So that's important. And then number 4 is to start thinking about these alternatives that I've mentioned, bringing clover back into the mix, or yarrow can work. I've seen some mixes with chamomile in it. Yeah, some of the universities are getting pretty creative. Oregon State University has gone quite a ways with some of these mixes, and Utah State University has been studying clover in lawns. So those are the 4 main things or steps that I think that we should take. But I think step 1 is just reducing the inputs for the lawn that we already have. Yeah,
absolutely. And now is the time as well to really impact that. I was saying on last week's show with Cynthia, that, people turning on their sprinklers this time of year, just because it starts to get warmer doesn't mean it's time to turn on our sprinklers. The longer we wait to mow that lawn, the deeper those roots are going to go, and the better off we're going to be training it to need less, moisture throughout the year.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I would recommend those same things. So just waiting to water is one of the best things that we can do, especially with our current water situation. I mean, the reservoirs are doing their job, which is great. They're designed to store water, and that's what they're doing. But we need to do our part too, and that's waiting to water and not water as much, reducing inputs overall.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to be right back after this with more from Shaun Moser, the Conservation Garden Park Manager, right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. It's the Gardening Utah Proven Winners Color Choice Shrub of the Week. Here's Cameron Alcott with Progressive Plants.
Hey there, it's Cameron at ProgressivePlants.com, and this week I'm going to bring you another forsythia, and the teeniest, cutest one yet. Show Off Sugar Baby is a 2-foot tall and wide ball of gold that would make Scrooge McDuck jealous. Its extraordinarily petite nature makes it ideal for those smaller parts of the yard that need a little bit of spring pop. Use this adorable little shrub as highlights around your planter beds. Mostly deer-resistant, this little sugar baby also tolerates poor soils. Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs knocked it out of the park with this one. It really feels like they packed a 12-foot shrub's worth of flowers on a petite 2-foot ball of awesome. Find yours by searching for the term Sugar Baby at ProgressivePlants.com or click the link in the episode notes.
Look for the Proven Winners white containers at ProgressivePlants.com or at your local garden center. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and today we've got Shaun Moser, the Conservation Garden Park Manager, and he's giving us all this interesting tidbits on why lawns and where did our relationship with lawns start? When did it become a trend? It's been so interesting, and there are a lot of things changing. And first of all, let's talk about some of the benefits of having a lawn.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of benefits of having a lawn, even just the standard monoculture Kentucky bluegrass lawn. One, it helps with soil erosion, right? You're not going to have as much soil erosion. You're not going to have as much dust in the air, right? Because the lawn's going to keep that down. Lawn can help cool the air as the plant transpires. Lawn, in the traditional sense that we've been using it, is really a good recreational surface. I mean, that's one of the main ways that we use it, and it's really good at that. And that's kind of something that our traditional lawn does best. But the other benefits of lawn that I mentioned, other plants can do those things without having some of the drawbacks that a traditional lawn has, right? Other plants can transpire and cool the air. Other plants can help with soil erosion and control. Other plants can keep dust down. Other plants can even provide shade, right? Shrubs and trees. So the benefits that I listed are not exclusive to lawn. I mean, one of them kind of is being the recreational surface, but there are alternatives out there that can provide some benefits also.
Yeah, for sure. So in the last segment, we talked about the benefits of incorporating clover into your lawn. Or we talked about incorporating clover into lawn. Let's go over some of the benefits of doing that.
Yeah, so there's quite a few benefits, and we've talked a little bit about this already, but there tends to be lower inputs overall, right? Because the clover is a legume pulling nitrogen into the ground for the grass to use, right? You can probably put down less water because the clover is going to stay green and keep your lawn looking green, right? Maybe when the grass actually browns out a little bit, the clover still looks green. Incorporating clover into the grass provides some drought and wear tolerance. Clover actually holds up pretty well to foot traffic. kind of like lawn does for the most part. It tends to create more of a thick and dense, lush mat on the ground, which people like the look of. And then if you do it in even more sustainable manner, maybe you mow less, right? Because you want the clover to bloom. So you want the lawn to grow higher. So there's a lot of benefits that way. And then not to mention, it provides some resources for pollinators. So
that's what I was going to ask you, actually. You do want the clover to bloom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's because of the benefits to bees and other pollinators, correct?
Yeah. And so you definitely want it to bloom. If you mowed it weekly, it probably wouldn't bloom, just because you'd be cutting off the buds, right?
Right.
But if you mowed every couple weeks, every 2 weeks or something, it would probably be fine and it would bloom. But really, one of the benefits is the blooms for the pollinators. So it's not such a desert for pollinators. There's actually something there for them, which I think is an important thing to do. So
I really do too, for sure. Is there any drawback to adding clover?
Yeah, so there's two things I would mention. If the person maintaining it doesn't realize that you're trying to keep clover in the lawn, it may be pulled or it may be sprayed, right? So that's something that could be a drawback, is if people don't know how to maintain it. The other drawback, and I'm not sure how real this is, a lot of people are concerned about kids getting stung by bees with the clovers blooming and things like that, which there might be something to that. But from my perspective, how often do you see kids on lawn anymore in general anyway? Or they, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right. So do our city parks or our front lawn really need to be a spot where it's completely void of clover just so our kids can play on it when maybe they're not playing on it anyway? I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe it's not as clear cut as that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, my grandparents had clover in their lawn, and I never, ever, we played there so much and so often, and all the, soccer and basketball and badminton and volleyball and all the fun things, and never, ever got stung.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I can see the concern. I just don't know how real it is.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and if you've got a planting bed surrounding your lawn and you've got perennials and all the other things, the bees are there.
They're there. Yep. And most of the time the bees are going to leave you alone.
Yeah, they're not looking for trouble.
They're not looking for trouble.
At the end of the day, we need bees. They're crucial to our survival. So everything that we can do to be friendly to bees is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So talk to us about some other alternatives there are to Kentucky Blue in addition to clover. What other types of seeds are, becoming trendy for putting into lawns?
Yeah. So you'll see clover. There's different types of clover that you'll see. So maybe I'll talk about those real quick. So you'll see white clover, strawberry clover, micro clover, which tends to be a little bit smaller, but it also tends to bloom less. Okay. So if people are concerned about getting stung, maybe the micro clover is the way to go. But we've used yarrow, just like the straight species yarrow at the conservation garden in a lawn. We've probably had that yarrow in the lawn here at the garden for maybe 5 or 6 years already, maybe 7 years.
Really?
And it does great. It's short. It's maybe 3 or 4 inches tall. It blooms a whitish pink color. So if we don't mow the lawn for a while, the yarrow will come up and it will bloom. But you can mow it weekly if you want to. And it'll stay short and it keeps weeds out pretty well. We have it mixed in with a fescue, I think, yarrow and fescue together. And we usually just mow it as a normal lawn and it does well. But last year we let it grow a little bit taller and bloom for a little bit, which was cool. But I've seen English daisy. I've seen chamomile.
Wow.
A few other things like that. I don't think the English daisy and the chamomile hold up long term quite like the clover and the yarrow does.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a fun addition for a few years if you're going to make the transition to something like this. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Now, what about ornamental grasses?
Yeah. So a lot of times when we talk about grass, people box it in, right? And think it's just lawn that we're talking about, Kentucky bluegrass. But really, there's a lot of ornamental grasses that people are probably familiar with. They're bunch grasses. They form clumps typically. You can find them from a foot tall to 8 feet tall. They're pretty common in our landscapes now. But what I would like to see is some of these areas where we're removing lawn. It would be nice to just replace that lawn with a swath of Elijah Blue fescue or Atlas fescue or little blue stem or blue oak grass, these ornamental grasses that are clumping. And I think they'd be less maintenance because really you only have to cut them down once a year.
Oh, wow.
And if you put them as a big swath, they would cover the same area that lawn does. But they would probably take a third to a quarter of the amount of water.
Wow.
And then you're not mowing them every week. They're doing their thing. They're looking good. There might be a few weeds that pop up in the middle, but those can be easily pulled. So I think ornamental grasses can play a role in the future when we start to remove lawn and replace it with other things.
Yeah. Now, what about perennials?
Yeah, so you can also use ground covers like creeping thyme, Turkish veronica, plumbago, euphorbia. These are all types of perennial ground covers that you can use instead of lawn. So with local scapes, one of the things that we say that you can use as an alternative is you can take out your lawn, and in your central open shape, in your local scape, you can put in creeping thyme or Turkish veronica. And that's pretty low maintenance. Most of them bloom. With the plumbago, you'd probably have to mow it down once a year. That'd be the case with the euphorbia also. But these are all alternatives that take less water. Now, can you have active recreation on these things? No.
Right.
But if you have a front yard where you're not going to be doing that anyway, maybe one of these alternatives will work for you.
Yeah. I've got a big section of creeping thyme, more as a pathway and
Nice.
in my front yard. And it's beautiful. And speaking of bees, that gets absolutely covered in bees. They love it. And I've never once been stung. Well, I'm a beekeeper. I've got a hive and I've still never been stung. So
yeah. I mean, for the most part, they just kind of do their thing.
Yeah.
I mean, my little girl, she's 2. And last year she was pretty obsessed with bees. She actually wanted to cuddle the bees, which I told her that's probably maybe not the best idea, but I like where her heart is at. So.
Oh, I want to cuddle the bees. That's adorable.
Yeah.
Show her the leaf cutter bees, a video of that. Those little leaf cutter bees are so stinking cute.
Yeah. It's cool what they do with those eastern redbuds too. It's mainly on the redbuds that I've seen it where they're cutting those leaves. It's pretty cool. Yeah,
my poor redbud tree. I've got this beautiful heart-shaped weeping redbud in my front yard, and it is my favorite tree. But boy, does it have a rough time toward the end of the year from those bees. But you got to let them do it. They're beneficial pollinators, and we've got to give them, some native, or well, not native necessarily, but some places to, do their work,
do their thing. Yeah. And I remember giving a tour at the garden a few years ago, and we stopped by the redbud and we were talking about the leafcutter bees. And someone asked, well, what do you spray on that? Or what do you do to kill the bees? And I said, that's not what we really want to do, right? It's okay if your redbud has some leaves that are cut up a little bit. I mean, does it really affect you? No, but it's good for those bees, right? So absolutely. I think people get hung up on this idea that their landscape is like the inside of their house and things are like furniture out there. It's not like furniture.
Yeah.
These are living organisms that we need to treat with respect.
Absolutely. I love that. And I try to, personally, I try to use as little intervention as possible, because when you let kind of nature do its own thing, every bug has its own, has its own predator, and you really just let nature take its course and gently support things that you want to bring more of, and gently discourage those that you want less of.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You really can find a balance.
Yeah. And I think using these lawn alternatives can bring more of a balance, I think
you're exactly right. Talk to me about fake turf. I noticed this last weekend at the Salt Lake Home and Garden Show, there was quite a few vendors selling just, fake turf.
Artificial turf.
Artificial turf. What do you think about that?
I think it has its place, like a lot of products do, right? So I think it's great as an athletic surface for football and soccer and things like that. I think it can be used in a residential situation, but I think it gets pitched as like this silver bullet to our water conservation issues. And I don't think that's it, right? And we've had people wonder, well, can you just remove the lawn in your park strip and put in artificial turf? I don't know if I think that's a great idea. I can't see that holding up well long-term in a park strip.
No,
also,
me neither.
The artificial turf doesn't last forever. And my concern is once it's worn down, where does it go? Are we just filling up our landfills with artificial turf? And what about all the plastics and the rubber that's in the artificial turf? Where is that going?
Right.
So I have concerns along those lines, but I think it definitely does have its place.
Yeah.
Athletics and things like that.
Yeah, I think I could see some in the residential area. I could see maybe using it as a pathway between pavers or something that that's far off a little bit, that you want to have green at all times. I mean, I could see, they had some pretty interesting pictures. I didn't see them using it as like a football field, for example, in the back of just, somebody using that as their entire lawn. It was more of a localscapes look, where they would just fill in certain areas that were more maybe entertaining, that could take the traffic and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think it can work in that way. Other places I've seen it work well is I've been to some of like the outdoor malls where in like in the middle of like a courtyard area or a plaza area, instead of them installing lawn, they've put in artificial turf. And it seems to work pretty well in that situation, because they can like move around tables and chairs on it and things like that. So it makes sense in those situations, I think. But it does have issues with like getting hot. It doesn't really cool down the area like lawn does. So it definitely does have its drawbacks, but also I think it does have a place too, if used properly.
Yeah, interesting. So there's a lot of, we've talked about all these different alternatives that you could add into your lawn. Talk to me about some new design styles and maybe some trends that you're seeing happen for, installing these types of different grasses into your yard.
Yeah, so I can talk about it in your yard, and then just what I'm seeing like as design trends, just like in public parks and things like that too. So there's this style called matrix style landscaping that's really starting to take hold. It's essentially trying to recreate a wild landscape. Right. But maybe not using only natives. Maybe we're incorporating natives and non-natives to try to make a landscape that's more sustainable and looks more like a wild landscape. But you're starting to see these installed in public parks. So one of the more famous places that it's been installed is the the New York High Line in Manhattan, where they've taken the old above ground railroad system that sits above the streetscape that was abandoned. And they've taken that and it runs through the city, but now they have a park that goes through it. And it has this matrix style landscaping. And what the matrix style landscaping is it's essentially, it's like you're building a cake. So it has layers. So there's a ground cover layer. So you can use traditional bark mulch, but on top of that, you would have ornamental grasses. So that's like a green mulch, right? It almost acts as a living mulch that keeps weeds down, right?
Yeah.
And then growing up amongst the ornamental grasses are echinacea, salvia, butterfly weed, different perennials like that. And then the top layer is shrubs and trees. So you're trying to recreate what nature does itself, right? Because nature usually has those layers. It has a ground layer that's mainly grasses or ground covers. Then it has some perennials that pop up, bulbs, and then it has shrubs and trees there too. And you're really starting to see this take off in public spaces. And it looks really nice to me. So
that is so interesting. It's really inspiring, actually, to think, how you want to recreate the space around you to be more, native to what it would have been had we not, torn everything up. Minus weeds, exactly. Of course.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the idea behind it is, I think it's acknowledged that we can't ever go back to how things were before we started building all of our infrastructure and buildings and streets. Like there's no going back to that. But what is an alternative to that provides some of the things that used to be there before, right? Yeah. And you can use natives, but you can also use non-natives that grow well in our climate and incorporate those things together. And it's just a more sustainable approach overall.
I couldn't agree more. I was just inspired the other day by pictures of some lawns coming up in England. And I was surprised at how many over in Europe have crocus and, bulbs into their lawns.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool to see that. I think we've considered doing that at the conservation garden over the years too. One of the lawn alternatives that we have at the garden is sedge. So it's the specific varieties called Blue Zinger. But we have this sedge that takes up about maybe a 10 by 20 foot space. And we have naturalizing tulips that pop up in the sedge, which is really nice.
How cool.
But I've seen similar things done with some warm season grasses like buffalo grass lawns or blue grama lawn, where you have crocus or naturalizing tulips pop up and bloom before the warm season grass starts to grow in the summer, right? So they're blooming in the spring before you start maintaining the buffalo grass or the blue grama and start mowing it down in the summer when it starts to grow.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can't believe we have 1 minute left of the show. Shaun, one of the questions that I didn't get to ask you was on removing lawn. If homeowners choose to replace some of their lawn with some of these things we've talked about, in the next 50 seconds, tell us how to do it.
Yeah, so there's some quick ways that you can do it. First, I recommend that you kill the lawn that you have if you're going to replace it entirely, because if you don't kill it, it's going to try to come back as a weed. So I recommend putting down plastic sheeting or something like that to kill the lawn first, and then removing it with a sod cutter or something like that. Then that gives you the space to put in a new planting bed or a new ground cover or a matrix style landscape. So.
Okay, I love it. Well, Shaun, thank you so much for being here on Gardening Utah. We really appreciate all this great insight you've given us today.
Thank you. It's been fun.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.